welcome to the Sunday morning drive, wherever you are on this amazing Sunday morning. And however you are listening, we are glad to have you here at Sports Empire Network as we prepare for the end of the NFL preseason and regular season football. Good morning. I am Chris, and I'm going to lead you through this Sunday morning drive journey. And I am joined today. We're going to bring him in first by Chase. Chase, how are you this morning, my guy?
I'm doing fantastic, sir. How about yourself?
Oh, I am happy to be here. I'm happy the preseason is almost over. I'm ready for real football, Chase.
Agreed.
And we're also going to bring in Chris. And hey, I have never met a Chris I don't like. So I'm just saying, let's bring in another Chris because two Chris's are better than one. Chris, how are you this morning, sir?
I am well. How are you?
No complaints. No complaints from this end. Gentlemen, we got another week of the preseason almost in the books. Obviously, we have to get through tonight because today's Sunday. So we got to get through tonight with the Saints game. But after that, we shift. We shift from looking at who's impressing us in the preseason to who's going to make the actual teams, because rosters are going to get cut down. A lot of people are going to lose opportunities this weekend. A lot of guys will then get signed to the practice squad in hopes of keeping their NFL dreams alive. But we got a lot of moving parts as we wrap up the preseason and head into essentially the bye week before the regular season begins. But let's jump right into it, gentlemen. Let's jump right into our breakdown we're going to start with Friday. So let's start with Friday's preseason games. Bryce Young back out there doing his thing. Good news, though, the offensive line looked a little bit better. Better news, he appears, does Bryce Young, to be having some chemistry built with Adam Thielen. And Chase, this was one of the questions kind of coming in. Who was going to pop in that wide receiver room, because they sent, obviously, their number one wide receiver out of the organization in a trade. So was the rookie quarterback going to be able to come in there and kind of build some chemistry with the guys that he had? And it appears that him and Thielen are at least on the right path as we head to the start of the regular season. Chase, do you like what you saw from the rookie in his final preseason warm-up?
I think it's a trend in the right direction. Obviously he's in a good situation with a veteran wide receiver like Adam Thielen. So hopefully he'll be able to make progress. But yeah, he looked a lot better this week than he has in previous.
And I think that's the most you can ask for, right? As far as your rookie quarterback, you're coming into a situation. This isn't a situation where a quality team just happened to have a rough season and there's just a bunch of good pieces around him. It's not a great team. And there's going to be speed bumps and there's going to be things that he has to overcome. And I guess, Chase, the biggest question that I have, does he have the talent to overcome what he's going to face in Carolina?
Are we talking about Adam Thielen or are we talking about quarterback?
Quarterback.
Right. Okay. So I think as long as they, accentuate the positives, hide the negatives, is what I've always said. If we all can agree that Bryce was not a day one starter. So he's been pushed into a situation. Highlight Adam Thielen, lean on him, and lean on the running back in the play action. And I think it could be possible for them to, stay in this division and hopefully make the playoffs. But if they try to let, Bryce Young, do stuff that he's not comfortable doing in the NFL, then it's going to be a long, long year for the Carolina Panthers.
We try to have a little more clarity when it comes to the backup quarterback position in Tennessee. Levis is still not able to play, so we haven't seen much from him this preseason. We know he's a work in progress. We know that Malik Willis is a work in progress, but I think he has made progress this preseason. But Chase, I'm still not sold. You look at his numbers, and he's getting a lot of praise from Titans fans this morning that he's finally kind of stepped up and done some things. And I'll give credit where credit is due. He played okay. yesterday. I have no issue for the most part with what he did. He looked like, in my opinion, a backup quarterback. I don't think he looked anywhere near, ready to lead an NFL team as a starting quarterback. But Chase, my biggest issue with Malik Willis is, yeah, you look at his numbers, 15 for 20, 211 yards passing, but he still makes the big mistakes. He had a stupid interception in the first half where, he has these moments where he just overthrows people. And he had a second turnover in the second half. And I can't look past that. I can't look at a guy and be like, yeah, he completed 75% of his passes and he did some great things with his feet. He still threw 2 picks. And he did it against not a starting defense. I think they had one starter in there for like 3 snaps just to get him a little rub, and the rest of it was backups. So if he's doing this against backup defenses, he's going to be at least the same against a starting defense. So for me, I'm not anywhere closer to Malik Willis ever being a starting quarterback again. I'm okay with him being the backup for now because Levis is injured and it is what it is. He needs more time to develop too. But I'm nowhere today further ahead with Malik than I was yesterday. What say you?
I'm right there with you, Chris. I'll be completely honest with you, man. I hate as a sports fan and as analyzing sports and football, being a huge football fan, I've always hated it when fans, teams give up on certain players. It's we all know it's really hard to play in the NFL, right? Out of the thousands and thousands of kids that play college ball, only select few make it to the NFL. And, some teams, like we were talking about earlier with Bryce, some teams want to convert players to their system and how they want to play instead of working on players' strengths and weaknesses. So I last year I was really hopeful for Malik. This year I'm there with you. I think we're ready to move on, and we're going to talk about Malik Willis being a backup quarterback or possibly a third string training camp or practice squad. So you're muted, Chris.
Am I good?
I'm good. I was
wrong,
muted.
Chris.
Chris, what do you? It's so funny because I rarely do that. Like, that's so embarrassing, guys. So, Chris, what do you think as far as Willis's future in Tennessee? Obviously, things are a little different right now with Levis being injured. He didn't get the reps that he probably needed. And I'm not going to say Will Levis lost the backup job, even though he kind of did, but he didn't lose it essentially because of anything he did wrong. He just wasn't there. And it doesn't make sense, in my opinion, for Tennessee to open the season with Levis as a backup quarterback because, one, we don't even know if he can play. We don't know what the injury is right now or where he is with that process. But 2, he just hasn't got the work in. So it makes sense for Malik to go out there and be the backup when the season starts. And again, like I said to Chase, he's progressed a little, in my opinion. But Chris, do you foresee him potentially being moved before the trade deadline? Do you see this really being his last season in Tennessee because he's not part of their future plans? What do you think it looks like for Malik as we go through this season and potentially into next offseason?
Well, I think once Will Levis is healthy, he will be the backup quarterback. There's no question about that. I think Malik Willis's time in Tennessee is definitely he's on borrowed time. Let's just say that. When they drafted him, I think they thought they had somebody who is going to come into the NFL and be a little bit better. But the progression has been very little. Like you said, we have seen some progression, but it's been very little, obviously. And they drafted Will Levis to be the future of that team. Whether that ends up actually happening, that's a totally different story. But I think Malik Willis is definitely on borrowed time in Tennessee.
And gentlemen, if you look at what happened with the Chargers on Friday, nothing really of note aside from there was some questions coming into the game about the depth in their running back room. Obviously, Eckler was going to be the guy in both the run game and the pass game, as he has been for the last couple of seasons. So no reason to think that wasn't going to happen moving forward. But there were some questions between Joshua Kelly and Isaiah Spiller as to what the depth behind Eckler was going to look like, because Isaiah had a nice start to camp. And that, unfortunately for him, that has trailed off a little bit, while Joshua Kelly has caught fire a little bit. So it does look like, in my estimation, that Kelly is most likely going to be the depth behind Eckler moving forward this season. But Chase, let's be honest, when it comes to the Chargers this season, it really comes down to, what is Kellen Moore going to do to get that offense to the next level, right? Because we've already seen Herbert be great. We've seen Herbert set a bunch of records for the first few seasons in the league. I think he has touchdowns and yards. He has a bunch of stuff as far as this is the most explosive, greatest stat lines we've seen for the first couple of years of an NFL starting quarterback. But what has that produced? It's produced a collapse in the playoffs. That we saw that. It's produced questions about their coach being on the hot seat. So I do think Kellen Moore is going to be a huge benefit to that team, Chase. But if you're over there and you're in that offensive room, what do you need to see differently on offense? Because stat-wise, it's there. But as far as getting them closer to a championship, they appear to be miles away.
Yeah. So what I see when I look at the Chargers is, I think Herbert is a very talented individual. I think he's a great quarterback. But if you go back last year and you watch, there was issues when, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen weren't in the game, and you saw Herbert struggle a lot. So going back to what we were talking about with Joshua Kelly, if I'm Kellen Moore, I'm looking for weapons for Herbert. Because just like his counterpart in the AFC West, Patrick Mahomes, the Kansas City Chiefs have done a phenomenal job in the past few years of building excellent weapons around Patrick Mahomes, giving him guys like Albert Wilson and, no-name guys that nobody's never heard of that he's out there doing. Do the same thing with Herbert. And when you look at guys like Max Duggan and Tyler Huseman yesterday, who were used, or not yesterday, but Friday, who were used very well in that contest. If I'm Kellen Moore, I'm looking at those guys and going, okay, these are guys that can make plays, guys that aren't going to get a lot of attention, like a Keenan Allen or a Mike Williams, that Herbert can help elevate and make plays with.
And Chris, isn't that going to be the first noticeable difference with Kellen Moore? Isn't, as an offensive mind, and I'm not going to call him an offensive guru because I think that term is used too much in the NFL, but as someone who understands the nuances of offense, isn't the first wrinkle that we're going to see with him being that he's going to utilize guys that maybe Staley just couldn't figure out how to use? He's going to be able to see guys that have that talent that didn't get the chance last season and kind of showcase them in an offense this season.
Well, and that's the reason they brought in Kellen Moore, is to turn this offense around. And if this offense doesn't get turned around this year, I don't think Staley is there anymore. And he is definitely on the hot seat. Once they brought in Kellen Moore, I think you're going to see a lot of different people. And, you talked about Kelly and Spieler and these guys. And it's great that there is that kind of competition going on in that, because I think Kellen Moore is going to bring in that kind of offense where, listen, everybody's focused on Eckler and Allen and Williams and those guys, and bring in some of these other guys who can spread the defense. Herbert is a hell of a quarterback. And I think ultimately, if you put the right weapons around him, he could be top 5 in the country, in the NFL, as a quarterback. And I think he has the talent to lead a team far deep into the playoffs and ultimately to the Super Bowl. I think he's that kind of talented quarterback. So bringing Kellen Moore in was a very smart decision on the Chargers' part. And I think you're going to see a nice spread offense. And Herbert's going to have tons of targets. And I think Eckler, Kelly, Spieler, and Duggan, and those guys you talked about are going to be targets for him.
No team this offseason has given me more back and forth than, for me personally, than the San Francisco 49ers. At first, I was unsure about Brock Purdy coming back from his injury. We've only seen so much of him. Yes, he was successful, but now he's coming off the elbow thing. There was all that background noise with the next Steve Young and Sam Darnold, and then Trey Lance was still there for a little bit. And despite all of that, from what we've seen, Chris, from Brock Purdy so far, he hasn't really shown us a reason to worry about anything. I mean, he got his first action a couple of weeks ago. He was efficient. He played again this past week. And again, he went in there. He led the offense. He had a rushing touchdown. He moved well. He threw well. I still don't think he's going to be a dynamic down the field passer, but we've seen in Kyle Shanahan's offenses, you don't need to do that to be successful. And I do see parts of his game that I think was lacking from Jimmy Garoppolo's game, where I say, well, hey, you know, if he does what he did last season and he can refine a couple of those things and he does have a couple of those holes filled that Garoppolo didn't have, this very easily could be the guy. So now I'm looking at it, whereas a couple of weeks ago, I was like, you know, what's Brock Purdy going to look like coming back? 2 weeks later, I'm sitting here like, okay, well, last week I said maybe I was disrespecting Seattle, but now I'm looking at it this week and I'm like, maybe I wasn't. Maybe San Francisco really is the clear favorite in that division. Chris, do you have any concerns about Purdy going into the season and replicating what he did last year and leading San Francisco to that title this year in the division?
Yeah, well, let's take a look and kind of talk about Kyle Shanahan, who has basically taken every quarterback that he has and elevated them to a new level. And Brock Purdy's just in the long line of those type of quarterbacks. And the whole thing is with Kyle Shanahan, if you're efficient, then you will be successful. You don't need to be a Steve Young. You don't need to be a Joe Montana. You don't need to be a Patrick Mahomes. You don't need to be one of these, you know, upper top tier quarterbacks to be successful under a Kyle Shanahan offense. And so what we saw last year with Brock Purdy is basically efficiency. And what we're going to see again this year is basically efficiency. And that's all you need in this type of offense with Kyle Shanahan. And I think basically we're going to see what we saw last year with Purdy. I don't think just because of the injury, I think he's going to come back healthy. He's going to be able to do what he did last year. He'll be able to replicate it because it's such a basic, I shouldn't say basic offense, but it's such a easy offense for a quarterback who, and I don't think, and I'll ask you guys, I don't think Brock Purdy is in the honestly top 15 quarterbacks in the NFL as far as performance and talent. But it's the type of offense, the Kyle Shanahan offense that he is in, that as long as he's efficient, it'll be successful.
And Chase, Chris brings up a great point. It is a quarterback-friendly offense. And that is a polite way of saying that if you are a competent quarterback in the NFL, this offense can make you look better than maybe you actually are. Now, again, that's like Chris said, we're not taking anything away from Brock Purdy. We're not saying that he is less, but you also have to be fair and put all the cards on the table because this was an offense that made Jimmy Garoppolo look, let's be honest, I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to look as good this year with the Raiders as he's looked in previous years when healthy with the 49ers. And I think a big part of that is the offense. He's not going to have the pieces around him. He's not going to have the scheme around him that he had with the Niners. So Chase, do you how much stock do you put into this idea that this system maybe props up quarterbacks a little more than what they actually are? But at the same time, is that enough with Purdy to get the Niners ultimately to where they want to go, which is an NFC title game a Super Bowl, because that's the goal for them, right? Shanahan wants a Super Bowl. His rival McVay has one. He doesn't, and that's what he's looking to get, right?
Yeah. I'm not really high on Kyle Shanahan, as you know, and to each his own. It's a, and I don't want to use the term because I don't want it to seem like I'm knocking the offense, but Jory in the comments earlier called Herbert or said that Lombardi was trying to make Herbert a dink and dunk kind of guy, and that's the offense that Kyle Shanahan runs, is a dink and dunk, because when he was with Atlanta, it's a whole different story. They had Julio Jones, they had high tier weapons around Matt Ryan, and Matt Ryan had a big arm. Matt Ryan is nowhere near the caliber of quarterback that what they've had in San Francisco. But what San Francisco has had since Kyle Shanahan has showed up is a really, 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 really good defense. I'm not going to sit here and praise Kyle Shanahan. I will say that Kyle Shanahan has done what it takes to get that offense moving forward, while the defense has carried that team. And I think absolutely, I think Brock Purdy can do the same thing this year. They still have valuable weapons over there for them to do it. And yeah, he can he can run short to medium passes, and this is not going to be a high scoring offense, but it's going to get the job done because like we've talked about, that's what Kyle Shanahan does. Is he takes what he has, and he turns one of my favorite sayings from Brock Lesnar is let's turn chicken shit into chicken salad. So, and that's what Kyle Shanahan does with with Jimmy Garoppolo, Brock Purdy, and that offense over there. So,
note to self, I need to take back the registration that I did for Chase into the Kyle Shanahan fan club. I thought that was going to be a nice gift for you to start off this season. Clearly, that was a misjudgment on my part. No worries. I will send a different gift to you in the mail. But that is off the list. Chase, let's talk.
21-3 is what I think of when I think of Kyle Shanahan. Always. It's always going to be what I think of. 21-3.
Chase, let's talk a little bit about the Kansas City Chiefs, something that I think you're going to enjoy talking about a little more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Blaine Gabbert appears to have won the backup quarterback job, and to that I say, who cares? Because if Blaine Gabbert is seeing time in Kansas City, your season is over, as far as I'm concerned. So unless it's because you're up 5 touchdowns. Yes. and they're pulling Mahomes for safety purposes because it's early in the fourth quarter. But if he's playing for an extended period of time and we're trying to evaluate what Blaine Gabbert can do with the Kansas City offense, it's a whole different conversation that we're having at that point. But Good for Blaine Gabbert. I agree he was efficient and he should have won the backup quarterback role. What I'm more interested in talking to you about specifically is the role that you see Justin Ross playing for this team this season. Obviously, the biggest talking point, aside from the defense in Kansas City, is what names is Mahomes going to make pop this year? Is it going to be Sky Moore, who had a little bit of a pop last year? Is he going to explode this year? But the name that keeps coming out of Kansas City, and we've seen it in camp and we've seen it in the preseason games, is this kid, Justin Ross. Is he just one of those preseason stories where you get to the regular season and the opportunities are going to be more limited, so it's just not going to be there? Or do you think, Chase, we're ramping up for him to be a serious part of this offense this season?
I don't know if he's ready to be a serious part of this offense, because and he's shown great, great pizzazz in the preseason and in training camp. However, one of the names that I'm focused on is Marquez Valdez Scantling. I don't know if MVS will finish, will make the team, the final 53-man roster. I wouldn't be shocked if the Chiefs move on from him. because the big gray cloud over Kansas City right now is Chris, and with MVS being overshadowed by guys who went undrafted last year, and other guys that showed great pizzazz in preseason. Like we talked about earlier, where Mahomes can take guys like a Rice or a Ross or any of those guys and turn them into somebody who catches touchdown passes. I don't know if I could see Ross potentially replacing or being one of the replacements for MVS and then moving on, because MVS has taken up a huge chunk of salary. So I like the way he looks, man. I was really impressed with him, and I'm also was impressed with number 82. He was returning kicks and catching passes. Blaine Gabbert, I was. You did mention that if Blaine Gabbert is playing, that is obviously going to be a, huge problem in Kansas City. Unless, like you said, we're up and comes in and gets a sore ankle in a game. Shane Buechele was never a backup option for me. I didn't look at it like that. But, looking at Rice, number 82, and all these players that they've shown in this preseason, I love it as a Chiefs fan. Again, going back to what I was talking about, the biggest issue for me is the defense and what Chris Jones is doing. Because if Chris Jones is holding out until week 8, you can count on the Detroit Lions and some of those other teams to absolutely positively run the ball down Kansas City's throat. And that's going to be a huge problem because Kansas City can't stop the run without Chris Jones.
And Chris, jumping over to Cleveland, I think the Browns as a whole looked pretty decent this preseason. I'm not a Deshaun Watson guy. I'm just not. I think a lot of the numbers, and I know that we have people who will shout to the rooftops about the stats that he put up in Houston. And I get it. Stats are stats, but I could also show you all the stats that Matthew Stafford put up in Detroit while people were saying that, he was a top tier quarterback and he's playing down 21 points half the time. And he's putting up stats because the defense has stopped caring. And yes, Watson has some success early in his career. He had a playoff win against Josh Allen. And I'm not taking anything away from him, but I'm looking at a guy who was almost 2 years away from football. He understandably looked rusty the second half of, or the 6 games he played in last season, whatever it was. And then I was looking for someone this preseason who looked closer to what he was in Houston on paper. And I just haven't seen it. Yes, he didn't make any major mistakes, in the game this weekend, but he's still only completing 50% of his passes. So I'm looking at a guy who's, supposed to be kind of finding that resurgence and kind of getting his feet back under him. And now he's had an entire offseason program under his feet. He's had an entire preseason under his feet, and he's still going out there completing about 50% of his passes. Do you have any concerns about Deshaun going into the season as far as what we're going to see from quarterback play? Do you see him in that top 10 in the league as like a tier 1 guy, or is he more tier 2 in your mind?
So let me say this to start off. First of all, I live in Clemson country. So we're talking, last question was about a former Clemson player, and now we're talking about a former Clemson player. I'm not a Clemson fan at all. I will say that. I do live 20 minutes away. However, I think you will see things out of Justin Ross, going back to the last, talking about the Chiefs. I think you're going to see some things from Justin Ross that are going to shock a lot of people. I will say that. Talking about Deshaun Watson, it's very hard for me to believe that we are going to see the Deshaun Watson of old. I think that period of time when he was out with all the things that were going on legally and, the NFL, him being put on the list, I think he just had too much time away. I think, a lot of those legal problems got him in the head. And I just don't see it. Listen, I wish we would see the Deshaun Watson of old. I love the Deshaun Watson of old. I think he was a top 10 quarterback, obviously, when he was in Houston. And I'd love to see that guy again. But I just don't see it. He had the 6 games, and I get it. Listen, he was away for almost 2 years or whatever it may have been. And he only played 6 games. But he hasn't really shown me anything in the preseason at all that shows me the old Deshaun Watson. And I hope he proves me wrong, but I just don't see him hitting his old potential. And part of it is also his age. I mean, listen, he's not old per se, but at the same time, again, he's not a spring chicken like he was in Houston. And so, it'll be interesting to see. Also, he's got some weapons in Cleveland. Obviously, their running back position is pretty strong. But it's going to be interesting to see who he's going to be throwing the deep ball to, because I think that's his strong point is being able to throw to the Tyreek Hill, again, Justin Ross, a guy like that who's got the burning speed to shoot down the line. And that's Deshaun Watson. And we saw it in Houston. That's his target for the most point.
And you're right, Chris, because he doesn't have that in Amari Cooper. I was at that game yesterday, and my biggest concern, as a Cleveland fan, if I was a Cleveland fan, my biggest concern would be, they played the second, third, and literally guys trying to make the practice squad in Kansas City yesterday. Nick Bolton didn't play. I mean, and Kansas City's defense is not any right home about, especially without Chris Jones. So, they had that Felix kid who they drafted from K-State, but I mean, other than that, there was not starters on Kansas City's defense throughout the whole game. And Deshaun Watson played almost a full half, and he looked scared and he looked lost out there.
And maybe it's the type of offense that they're using. Maybe that might be part of Watson's problem.
Yeah. There was a couple of times where he had a clear line to continue scrambling, and he decided to run it up the middle with a bunch of big 300-pound linemen in the way. And I was watching him, and I was like, what, Deshaun Watson of old, like we've talked about in Houston, had the ability to scramble and make plays. And I just didn't see that out of Deshaun Watson yesterday. He tried a couple of times, and I think I don't know if it scared him or if if they told him to stay away from it. But watching him try to run up the middle like this is still college and you're trying to still do quarterback draws, it's not going to work out. And if I'm Cleveland, I'm really, really worried about Deshaun Watson going forward in this season. So,
but at least Cleveland knows who their starting quarterback is going to be. The same cannot be said for the Arizona Cardinals. Chase, they just got guys in that quarterback room. I mean, Dobbs is there, McCoy is there. They didn't play yesterday. They got a rookie in there whose name escapes me right now. They got another guy in there, Brow, something like that. Toon is the rookie, by the way. But literally, it looks like Arizona's stance is we're not going to really focus on Kyler this season. We're going to have a merry-go-round of quarterbacks. And then we're going to see where we are after like 8 or 9 games, 10 games, wherever that Kyler is supposed to come back mark is. And if we're in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, maybe we'll just continue the merry-go-round. Am I crazy for thinking that, Chase? Because we've seen them dump a starting quarterback that they drafted high after a year before. And granted, Kyler's been there a little longer, but I don't think they love Kyler Murray. I don't think they're married. I mean, financially, they're a little bit married to Kyler Murray. But aside from that, I don't think they would shed a tear if they moved on from Kyler.
No, I don't think so at all. And in fact, I think that's what they're trying to do. I think that's why you're seeing a merry-go-round of quarterbacks right now, is they're looking at guys that they can say, okay, who can we put in a position right now and then possibly move on from Kyler Murray. I'm not shocked. The Arizona Cardinals have they have completely not weirded me out, but just made some really weird decisions the past couple of seasons. I'm still absolutely blown away that you just cut I'm drawing a blank. DeAndre Hopkins, they just cut him. So stuff like that. I think that the Arizona Cardinals see the writing on the wall, and the writing on the wall is rebuild, and that is where they're headed. So,
Chris, in Tampa Bay, Baker Mayfield is QB1. Feel how you want to feel about that. The offensive coordinator had a lot of positive things to say about Kyle Trask, who is going to be QB2. Both quarterbacks have been decent in the preseason. We've seen Baker do a couple of Baker things, but we've also seen Baker, for the most part, be a consistent, competent-looking NFL quarterback. We've seen the same thing from Kyle Trask. I don't think the expectations are very high on this team, but at the same time, Chris, I look at their division, and I'm like, well, I mean, we all think the Saints are just going to run away with this, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if they only win 8 or 9 games. I think the ceiling for Tampa Bay could be 8 games. So there's potential. Tampa Bay could sit in this for a little bit and be competitive and kind of in the division conversation for the first half of the season. I can see that. But with the praise that's coming out of Tampa Bay for Kyle Trask from the offensive coordinator, would you imagine the leash for Baker is going to be pretty short this season? Because I don't think they're married to either one of those guys. I don't think either guy is the quarterback of the future. But at the same time, I think Tampa Bay does see something in Kyle Trask as almost a 1 and a 1A compared to Baker. So with that in mind, do you think Baker is on a really short leash this season?
You will see Kyle Trask by the 3rd or 4th game become the starting quarterback there. And I have a little bit of bias against Baker Mayfield because I can't stand him. And I haven't since he was at Oklahoma. I think he's overrated. I think his attitude is terrible. He's shown it over, the past few seasons. And unfortunately, Baker Mayfield is going to cost Todd Bowles his job. And so I don't think you'll see Todd Bowles there next year. Todd Bowles, hell of a defensive coordinator, but we've seen him as an NFL head coach when he was with the Jets and now with Tampa Bay. He just doesn't have it. He just can't cut it as a head coach. But one hell of a defensive mind. I'd have the guy as my defensive coordinator any day of the week. And so I just don't see Baker lasting past if he lasts past the 3rd game. Honestly, I'd be shocked. But I say 3rd or 4th game, Kyle Trask will end up being the starting quarterback in Tampa Bay. And we'll see. Obviously, getting thrown in the fire whether Trask can handle it. And the offense. Everybody loves to talk about. This guy's look great in preseason. That guy's look great in preseason. It is preseason. People aren't starting their number ones. You're going against 2s, 3s, guys trying to make the squad. You're not going against the number ones that you're going to see during the regular season. And yes, you may perform well in the preseason, and people may heap praise on you, but it doesn't mean anything to me. And it shouldn't mean anything to anybody else because you're not really playing against true competition.
Chase, what is the ceiling for Tampa Bay this season?
6 wins. 6 wins. I 1,000% agree with everything Chris said. Baker is a very talented kid. You go back and watch him in college. He is, but he has a horrible attitude. And Chris's prediction of week 3, Baker gives teams bulletin board material all the time. And what's going to happen is he's going to get in a press conference and he's going to get in his feelings and he's going to say something to upset the Tampa Bay fans, the Tampa Bay media, and they're going to call for Todd Bowles to make a change, and Todd Bowles is going to make a change. But unfortunately, there's just not enough on this team for that team to end their season productively. And unfortunately, come Black Monday, Todd Bowles will unfortunately be one of the ones that is let go from his team. So,
and gentlemen, we couldn't have a football show unless we talked about America's team, and that, of course, being the Dallas Cowboys. Before we get into that, let me just say, in case you were wondering, because I'm sure maybe you were. I know you guys aren't Cowboy fans. I am not either. But maybe you were wondering, hey, where's Dak Prescott? Don't worry. He didn't play in the preseason because he's focusing on week 1. And I know you might be like, well, wait a minute. You know, Aaron Rodgers played in the preseason. Tua played in the preseason. Are they not focusing? No. They can multitask. They can play in the preseason and they can also focus on the start of the season. But Dak just wanted to focus on week 1. So he took the preseason off from playing quarterback. He did not take the preseason off from being the offensive play caller, which is what he was for their preseason game this weekend. And gentlemen, he didn't do that bad. The offense looked pretty decent. Granted, it's the preseason. Granted, they're running 2s and 3s and 4s and 5s and 6s. But his play calling was pretty decent, which makes me ask you this, Chase. Maybe it won't be that bad with Mike McCarthy this year if Dak can call plays too, because one of my biggest concerns with the Dallas Cowboys this season is Mike McCarthy is incompetent when it comes to play calling. I'm sorry. I'm sure he's a great human being. You know, I've heard great things about him as a person, but I do not think he should be calling offensive plays in the NFL. I also don't think he should be managing the clock because he can't really seem to do that either. But now we see that Dak Prescott can apparently call plays. So obviously I say that half kiddingly. But Chase, what is the offense going to look like this season in Dallas from a play calling stance? Because do we really believe after, and we've already seen, I'm not just sitting here saying Mike McCarthy can't call plays. We've seen it. We've seen Mike McCarthy not be able to call plays. We've seen Mike McCarthy not be able to manage a clock. And we've seen the Dallas Cowboys lose one of the best offensive coordinators in football. And we are just supposed to think that it's good. Dak's fine. We're just going to put more on his plate and it's going to be okay. Chase, why are Cowboy fans being delusional right now, not thinking that all of these things are going to impact the offense?
Because Cowboys fans have been delusional since 1997. But I'm not a Dak Prescott hater. I love Dak Prescott. I think he's very talented. He does have an injury bug a little bit. Dallas has a problem where the consistency doesn't match up. And a lot of that has to do with the front office. Do I think that Dak Prescott and Trey Lance can lead Dallas to the promised land? Absolutely, they could. 1,000%. But do I think that the Dallas's front office and their coaching staff can lead them to the promised land? No, I don't. So yes, Chris, you are 1,000% right. Dallas has a massive problem with Mike McCarthy. And letting Dak Prescott call plays is not going to change much. It goes back to that chicken shit and chicken salad thing. You can dress it up all you want, but at the end of the day, it still smells. So, and that's what the Dallas Cowboys are. They've got a lot of great talent on that team, and looking at that team on paper, they are a playoff contender, Super Bowl contender team every time. But coaching staff, Mike McCarthy should have been gone after first, maybe second season.
the craziest thing about Mike McCarthy, and it blew my mind, and Colin Cowherd brings this up a couple of times whenever he talks about Mike McCarthy, he slides this in there. Mike McCarthy has acknowledged that during his interview, he lied to Jerry Jones. During his interview, he talked about how coming into the interview, he watched every Dallas Cowboy game of the previous season to analyze. And I get it. Like, when someone says that to you, you have two thoughts. Your first thought is, you're a liar, you didn't do that. Or your second thought is, wow, like, look at this guy, like, we need to hire him. And clearly Jerry Jones took the second thought of that. And I get it. You say what you got to say, you get the job, and you prove it on the field. But for him to come back and acknowledge the fact that, no, I didn't really watch all those games, I just said that to Jerry, like, that shows me how you kind of view the leadership within that organization. You felt
Absolutely.
comfortable enough to come back and put out into the NFL world that you lied during your interview with Jerry Jones. And now by openly stating it, you don't really see that being a problem as far as how it's going to impact you. And Chris, that brings me to my next talking point. They go and they get Trey Lance. I didn't think any team was going to offer more than like a 6th round pick for Lance. They offered a 4th. So they got Trey Lance, whatever, great for them. What caught me was and Jerry's always good for this, the soundbite Jerry gave after they got Trey Lance was how he thinks Dak's leadership is going to help Trey Lance reach that next level, whatever that next level is in the NFL. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, Chris, well, hot damn. Clearly, the leadership with Jerry Jones isn't respected by the head coach. Now you want to talk about your starting quarterback, who I do think has intangibles, but at the same time, this is the same starting quarterback, the same guy who has the bag, the same guy who is the face of your franchise, who has cornerbacks coming up to him during practice, chewing him out, swearing at him, cursing him out, basically taking him down a level in front of the entire team because clearly they don't respect whatever it is that Dak Prescott is doing. So, Chris, is there a leadership issue on the Dallas Cowboys? Because I'm seeing a lot of disrespect from people that probably shouldn't be showing disrespect, and I'm seeing a lot of people who shouldn't be disrespected in the owner of your team and the quarterback of your team.
Well, it starts from the top. It starts with the Jones family. It starts with Jerry himself. He basically tried, without doing so directly, calling out Dak Prescott during that when he was talking about Dak will bring Trey. Listen, Trey Lance is built for this offense. There's no question about it. This is his style of offense. And so with Jerry saying that, he basically is disrespecting Dak and saying, listen, Dak will bring him up another level because Trey's going to take over for Dak at some point. So, again, it starts from the top down. And so it starts with Jerry, Mike McCarthy. And I'll say this. As long as Jerry Jones is alive and still owns the Cowboys, they won't win another Super Bowl because he steps on his tail. I'd say something else, but he steps on his tail all the time. And that's going to continue to happen. And I think Dak Prescott, as good as he is, and first of all, Dak Prescott should be focused not on calling plays, but getting with his team, becoming a respected leader. And it's Travion Diggs who is calling him out and making fun of him, and for the most part, calling him names. Travion Diggs is an absolute POS, in my opinion. I think he's highly overrated. He does the big plays, but he gets his butt burnt all the time when it comes to a lot of those long touchdowns. We've all seen the replays over and over again of him getting burnt. But yeah, he comes up with the interception because it's sort of a risk reward kind of defense that Diggs plays. And so he disrespects Dak, calling him names and all that stuff. And so it's just a leadership thing, and it starts with Jerry Jones. And I don't think anything is going to change in Dallas as long as that family runs this team. Obviously, listen, they've built themselves an empire. There's no question about it. They are the number one valued team in all of NFL. I think it's $2.5 billion more than the next team behind them. They're at like 9-point-something billion dollars. Team behind them is, I think, the Giants at like 7.2 billion. So listen, they've built themselves a name. They early on with, firing Tom Landry, bringing in Jimmy Johnson, having those Super Bowls in the 90s, but we haven't really seen anything since. Once Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith left, it's been nothing but a disaster.
And Chase, we're going to kind of segue into the final segment of the show, and we're going to talk a little New York Jets football. And obviously, I feel a certain way as a Dolphin fan. I think I've been nice and respectful this entire preseason. I have said the Jets have the potential of competing for the division. I said they have the potential to make the playoffs. I've been nice. Here is my concern, though. How in the hell are you going to sit here when the preseason is over after naming Mekhi Becton your starting right tackle, the same guy who was pulling himself out of week 1 of the preseason because he is overweight and his knees couldn't handle the punishment of an NFL game? He has essentially been a traffic cone for the better part of his career in the NFL. You have a 38-year-old left tackle on the other side who you are crossing your fingers somehow magically plays the entire season, because if he goes down, I don't know what your offensive line is going to do. And that's with the fact that you've had offensive line issues the entire preseason. Aaron Rodgers has come out and said that, hey, spots are still up for grabs. Nothing is set in stone. Basically saying, none of your jobs are safe. Someone better start protecting me because I keep getting hit. It's going to be an issue. We talked about a couple of weeks ago how they were floating out the idea of trading for his left tackle from Green Bay because he wasn't happy with the group that he had. That talk kind of went unanswered because Green Bay was probably like, no, we're going to protect our quarterback, not him. Chase, how is it that 2 weeks later, Mekhi Becton is named the starting right tackle? Aaron Rodgers did have a nice little preseason debut for the Jets. I'll give him that. But come on. There is no way a logical Jet fan is now sitting here saying, we're good. Our offensive line is going to be fine. Stop it, Chase. He's still Mekhi Becton. He's still bigger than he should be. He still has knee issues, and he still kind of looks like a traffic cone.
I agree. I think that Aaron Rodgers tried to pull the trigger and get them to trade for David, and it didn't work out. And now they are sitting there going, hey, let's set in stone now. But don't be surprised if they still make a move for somebody by the beginning of the season, because if you think Aaron Rodgers isn't in there, in people's ears in the front office, you're sadly mistaken, because that's what Aaron Rodgers, regardless of how amazing and how great Aaron Rodgers is, that's what Aaron Rodgers does, is he makes sure that the front office knows, hey, this is who I like and this is who I don't. Here's who we should get rid of and here's who we shouldn't. And like I said, do not be shocked if the Jets, I wouldn't be shocked if the Jets got a second tier or third tier player and got rid of their right tackle and left tackle just to get some draft picks out of it, and just to get somebody that Aaron Rodgers thinks, well, at least he's got good knees. So like I said, I would be floored if they didn't, and don't be shocked if they do.
And Chris, their left tackle is all right. I mean, I don't have an issue with their left tackle, but how much faith are you putting in Mekhi Becton?
Well, let me say this. As a Jets fan, I have always had issues with our offensive line since 2 seasons ago when we drafted Mekhi Becton. Obviously, he's, like you said, he's been a a traffic cone basically for the better part of his entire career when he's been able to play, which hasn't been often, to be honest. I think Dwayne Brown, I think is going to be fine. I don't think there's going to be an issue with him, even at 37, 38 years old, whatever he is. I think we'll be okay there. But I do think that the Jets will, in the next, I'd say, week and a half, go out and try. Aaron Rodgers left us a good sized chunk salary cap on purpose. And this is what we're going to need to use it for. I think we have, 25, 29 million in salary cap money for this year. And I think ultimately that's what we're going to use it on, is to acquire a player who can, basically not be a traffic cone like Mekhi Becton is. And I think also, there's a couple other interesting characters that are on the Jets depth chart. I think you'll end up ultimately seeing, if they don't make a trade, you'll ultimately see Joe Tippmann become one of the starters on that offensive line. He's had a pretty good preseason. He's done well in practice. So we'll see what happens. But I think if Becton can't, or his knees or whatever his issue is, can't handle it, you'll see Joe Tippmann step in. And I think, again, like Chase said, Joe Tippmann is kind of a second, third string kind of guy, but I think he'll be much better than Becton is with the way his knees and stuff are.
And gentlemen, make sure you tune in to the last game of the preseason today, the Saints versus the Texans. And that brings the morning drive to a conclusion. Next week, we'll be right back here going over all of the cuts that are going to happen this season. Keep an eye out on the Jonathan Taylor stuff. That should be resolved on Monday or Tuesday, as that was the deadline for him to potentially seek a trade and get out of Indianapolis. But aside from that, gentlemen, I appreciate you being here on behalf of myself and Chris and Chase and everyone who joined us this morning in the comments. Make sure you are here this same time next week as the morning drive prepares for the start of the NFL season. Gentlemen, until next week.